morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to be standing here because I'm going to be reading. I worked on the presentation until very last minute this morning, so I didn't print it. So I'm going to be hiding here, but I hope you can hear me. And most importantly, that you can see what's going up there. Yep. All right. I'd like to begin to thank Rikke Jørgensen for inviting me to contribute to this pertinent conference. I'm really also very honored to be asked to deliver a keynote, and I'm truly sorry for not being able to attend yesterday's amazing program. I hope nonetheless that what I'll be presenting here today will not be too repetitious in terms of yesterday's conclusions, but will perhaps contribute to the theme of intercultural dialogue in a meaningful way. On February 14th and 15th this year, a series of shootings occurred in Copenhagen. 2 victims and the suspected perpetrator were killed, and 2 police officers were wounded. The first shooting took place on February 14th at a public event called Art, Blasphemy and Freedom of Expression at the Krudttønden Cultural Center, where a gunman killed 1 civilian and wounded 3 police officers. Swedish artist Lars Vilks was among the speakers, and it is thought to have been the main target because of his drawings of Muhammad. The second shooting took place later that night outside the city's great synagogue in Krystalgade. A gunman killed a Jewish man on security duty during a Bat Mitzvah celebration and wounded 2 police officers. Later that morning on Svanevej near Nørrebro station in Copenhagen, police, while tracking suspects, shot and killed a man after he opened fire on them. The man was identified as Omar Abdel Hamid El Hussein, a 22-year-old man born in Denmark to Jordanian Palestinian parents, whom police said was responsible for both attacks. Politicians, media, and the Danish public at large were prompt to condemn the shootings as terrorist Islamist attacks on Danish freedom of speech and religion. And those oppositional and minority voices who have tried to read the shootings as the result of a social conflict or a social crisis have had very little resonance. After the shootings, Swedish National Radio asked me for a statement due to my curatorial work on racism, migration, politics, and coloniality. And I told them that in my opinion, art's most important tasks at the moment are 1. To examine what structures in Danish society angered and alienated El Hussein to such a degree that he resorted to killing. And 2. To create platforms that stimulate greater understanding between minority and majority communities by presenting new models of conviviality and solidarity, thereby countering normative structures of exclusion and inequality. I will present 2 proposals for such platforms today. Am I going too fast or too slow? You're with me? That's great. The first project is the Trampoline House, an independent refugee justice community center in Copenhagen that I was so fortunate to be part of establishing in 2010. Trampoline House provides refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in Denmark with a place of support, community, and purpose. The other project I want to talk about is CAMP, Center for Art on Migration Politics, an exhibition venue for art discussing questions of displacement, migration, immigration, and asylum that I launched in 2 spaces inside the Trampoline House just a month ago, together with my colleague, independent curator Refugee Hansen. The Trampoline House and Camp... Oh, I'm not... Oh my God. Oh, oh my God. This is where I talked about El Hussein and the most important tasks of art at the moment. This is an image from inside the Trampoline House. And, oh. Sorry. It's kind of stuck. Oh. There you go. And this is while renovating camp. All right. Remind me of this, okay? Here we go. Trampoline House and the camp project both take their starting point in the fact that more people than ever before are displaced from their homes because of climate disaster, war, conflict, persecution, or poverty. Most receiving countries have responded by increasing their border controls, tightening their immigration policies, incarcerating refugees and asylum seekers, and deporting people without residence permit. The large migratory flows and refugee flows have resulted in a whole migration management industry, which is a series of juridical and political procedures and technologies that contemporary nation states use to try to regulate transnational migration and to exclude unwanted immigrants. In Denmark, which has a population of roughly 5.5 million, 20 to 40,000 undocumented migrants are estimated to work and reside in the country without being registered, according to a police estimate in 2012. Many of them live a precarious life as homeless in the streets. Also in Denmark, by August 2014, there were 7,900 asylum seekers waiting for their asylum application or their deportation to be settled. People who seek asylum in Denmark or have been denied asylum are accommodated in asylum centers scattered across the country while they wait for the authorities to settle their asylum case or deportation. Some wait months, others years, but all center residents share the burden of not knowing exactly how long they will have to stay in the asylum center system. In the centers, there are very few activities and possibilities for educational training. And if you want to live or work outside the center, you have to obtain special permission from the authorities. Health studies indicate that many grow ill from the waiting, the uncertainty, the inactivity, and from the feeling of not being able to control one's own life. And it has also been proven that long-term stays in the centers without a resolution may lead to various permanent disorders. For your information, the average stay in the centers in 2013 was 1.5 years. That included 727 asylum seekers who had waited more than 3 years and 29 who have been waiting more than 15 years. I'm getting good at it. Following the writings of Giorgio Agamben on the figure of the refugee and the structure of the camp, Danish theorist Mikkel Bolt has described the Danish asylum centers as literal camps, each of them making up, and I quote, a point in an institutionalized, discriminative juridical system designed to reduce the life quality of its residents. According to Bolt, the Danish asylum system is a system of forced social disintegration, the architectural manifestation of state racism, designed to keep the undesirables on the outside. Trampoline House was formed in reaction to this racist system and conceived during a series of workshops for asylum center residents and socially engaged artists that the Copenhagen-based artist Morten Gold initiated and conducted in 2009 in collaboration with Paris-based artist Joachim Hamoud and myself. Together, all the workshop participants developed the idea to create a user-driven community center where refugees, asylum seekers, forced migrants, Danish citizens, and other residents of Denmark would be able to meet, engage in activities together, exchange knowledges, and develop strategies for resistance and change. A house that should work to break the social isolation of refugees, asylum seekers, and forced migrants in Denmark, and through legal counseling, education, and community, provide these precarious groups with information and tools needed for them to better their difficult life situation. A house that should work to inform the Danish public about the conditions of refugees, asylum seekers, and undocumented migrants in Denmark, in order to motivate this same public to a more just, solidaristic, and sustainable refugee and asylum policy. And a house that should jumpstart the inclusion of refugees awarded asylum in Danish society and help them through Denmark's very demanding 3-year-long integration program. In November 2010, following a very tough period of fundraising and trying to keep the workshop group together, we finally managed to raise enough funds to realize our concept, and on November 27th, 2010, the Trampoline House opened to the public. Trampoline House is today a self-governing institution with a board of directors, a paid staff of 4, me being one of them, and a large group of interns and volunteers. In average, we have approximately 350 visits per week, made up by 125 regular asylum seekers and refugees visiting the house, and 40 regular non-refugees. Financial support to our administration and programs comes from public and private funding, donations, and memberships. It's important for me to stress that Trampoline House is completely self-made, homemade from the bottom up. The house is currently open 4 days a week, and just like in any other home, everybody contributes to the daily life of the Trampoline House. Together, we organize legal counseling, language classes, cooking, cleaning, childcare, creative workshops, debates, public campaigns, and other activities. Our women's club and youth club organize special weekly activities and counseling for women and young asylum seekers who suffer doubly in the camps. In our weekly house meetings, what you could call the democratic parliament of Trampoline House. Everybody can join discussions on global refugee politics and on the daily organization and running of the house. Several days a week, we share a hot meal, meet for a cup of tea or coffee, and on Fridays we party and dance to our favorite music. Like a real trampoline, the house is a space for refugees and asylum seekers to recharge and gather the energy and support needed to jumpstart a better life, and for the Danish public to get motivated to reform the current refugee and asylum system. This short video clip from 2011. This short video clip from 2011, made shortly before our first 1-year anniversary, gives a pretty good impression of the house.
Like in 3 weeks, this house is 1 year old, so we're going to have a birthday party. It is about 3 years ago that we got the idea to create a trampoline house where people who live in the camps and Danes could meet and build something together.
There's no discrimination of social activities and social life. Life is just normal here. Everybody is equal.
And I got a haircut.
And I think that's what I hear from people in the trampoline house. That they say they had a very bad and negative impression of Denmark until they heard about the trampoline house. And that changed the situation in many ways, because it gave them the chance to work and to do something and to be talked to in respect and to be asked, what can you do? What are your resources? Is there something you want us to help you with, or can you do something for us?
I encourage more people to come to Trampoline House and participate in the various activities and be part and parcel of everything that's happening in the house.
Every Friday in this house we prove that it's possible, that this integration is not this big problem that the government told us. Actually, we feel that we have a model here which can be an example for the rest of the country.
On April 17th this year, just a month ago, Frederica and I, who together form the curatorial collective Kuratorisk Aktion, which means curatorial action, were finally ready to launch our non-profit exhibition venue camp in the heart of Trampoline House with the inaugural exhibition Camp Life. Camp Life, which has the subtitle Artistic Reflections on the Politics of Refugee and Migrant Detention, which is still on view until June 14th, zooms in on the refugee camp, the asylum center, and the detention center as the nation-state's perhaps most extreme responses to human migration. It shows projects by 9 international contemporary artists and collectives who in different ways examine what kind of space the camp is, which functions it performs, what political juridical structures have made camps possible to begin with, and what living in a camp does to the subjectivity, body, and soul of camp residents. Some of the works in the exhibition portray everyday life and the management of displaced bodies in Palestinian refugee camps, in Danish asylum centers, and in Australian detention centers. Other works go behind the facade of the camp to examine its logic as a site where a population is divided into two and the undesirable are placed. And still other works in the exhibition contextualize camp life and describe the flight routes that many refugees and migrants have followed prior to their detention in a refugee camp, an asylum center, or a detention center. Half of the contributing artists and collectives are refugees themselves and have spent time in an asylum or detention center. Camp has an ambition of producing 3 exhibitions annually on displacement and migration with renowned international artists as well as less established practitioners, really making an effort to prioritize artists with refugee or migrant experience. Camp takes its point of departure in the fact that more people than ever before are displaced, and that the center works to increase insight into the life situations of displaced and migrant persons, and to discuss these in relation to the overall factors that cause displacement and migration to begin with. The objective of camp is, through art, to stimulate greater understanding between displaced peoples and the communities that receive them, and to stimulate new visions for a more inclusive and equitable migration, refugee, and asylum policy. In short, we aim for camp to become a space where audiences, both with and without refugee or migrant backgrounds, are able to identify with the living conditions of displaced peoples through art and to find inspiration for an alternative migration political agenda. Camp is intended to be a platform for artists whose work represents displaced and migrating people's experiences, work that sheds light on the struggles that refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, trafficked and enslaved people fight every day. On that note, let me end by quoting Danish development consultant Tine Bundgaard for stating not too long ago that if El Hussein had had a place like camp or Trampoline house, then maybe the Copenhagen shootings might never have happened. Those of you who are joining the bus tour tomorrow will visit camp and Trampoline house in person. If you are not going, then I will end this presentation with a short video documenting camp's launch party and inaugural exhibition. Thanks so much for your attention. Not done yet.
This exhibition tries to show the conditions of the Danish asylum system within the art context.
And as a fashion designer, I decided just to create a collection to pay tribute to the missing and dead refugee.
We've created 5 guerrilla radio transmitters. So when you explore the different radio frequencies, you can tune into different women's conversations on the conditions that they live in within the Danish asylum system.
I was invited to show a film that I've made in Amsterdam asylum camp about 3 Afghan asylum seekers, and it's about waiting time and everyday life in the asylum camp.
I used a life jacket with barbed wire just to show that after to survive, they still also in prison because they serve them, but they put them in camps.
There are many problems about the asylum centers that I would hope would change, but I think one important step is that people know about what's happening in order to act.
This is not how people have to live.
All right.
Thank you so much. It immediately raises a great number of questions, and we have about 15 minutes to have a conversation with you. And you're more than welcome to join in and raise whatever question you would like to put to Tone. I could start by saying, well, I mean, I've followed the Trampoline House ever since you and Morten started it. I've worked more with Morten than with you.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that you have already, in the sense that you have existed quite short, it's a very limited amount of time you've actually had to your disposal, you've already manifested yourself as a game changer. If you were to describe your own position as an artist running the Trampoline House and the way that the Trampoline House has been recepted in the artist environment, how would you do that? What would be kind of your position in that?
Well, there's been a reception a delayed reception. I think it's only within the past year or so that the international art world have shown interest towards the Trampoline House. And we're partly to blame for that ourselves because we've been so busy organizing the house, developing a structure, inventing methodologies that suit the different people using the house, that it didn't matter a lot to us to be visible in the arts and to be represented in art exhibitions. I get this question a lot with Trampoline House. I think more recently we have found that it is important to keep insisting that Trampoline House is art, that this is also something art can do, that the special kind of platform, the structures for engagement and dialogue and exchange are made possible through artistic, activist and curatorial ways of thinking and socially organize. But I also have to say that even though you say it's a short time, 5 years is a very long time of running a permanent project, and it's the permanent commitment to Trampoline House that also kind of prevents us from traveling with the project around the world. Partly because programming a house 4 days a week, 5 years in a row, getting the funding for it is time demanding. But also because the majority of people having invented and using Trampoline House are not able to travel. So it feels kind of wrong to be representing the project on behalf of this huge community again and again.
But would you say that that's to some extent because it's a paradoxical situation that on the one hand the kind of lust of going outside the Trampoline House and try to kind of reflect it in others' experiences and maybe even share the knowledge that came out of the process outside of the Trampoline House has also to do with the very big benefit of actually being inside the Trampoline House, namely that it's becoming more than a project. It's becoming a permanent installation. It's a social installation. It's a physical house. It's for full-time employees, including yourself. And so it kind of gets the structure of an institution, but it's still outside the mainstream institutional framework. Is that kind of...
Yes, so within the arts institution, yes, but we are beginning to become a more powerful political player. I think it has rumored in Parliament, for instance, that and in the Red Cross, which administrates most of the asylum centers in Denmark, that we have the trust and confidence in the house of people living in the camps. And thus we are also able to transmit voices and criticisms from the camps through the house to peoples in position of power. And that, I think, is very important for us if we have this long-term goal of closing the camp system and replacing it with a more sustainable and equitable asylum system.
And as such, has already created kind of resonance because you're working cross-sectorially. You work with the Danish Red Cross, you work with the municipality, you work with social housing systems. So how has that reflected into the art sector in Denmark is quite kind of pipeline divided, there is a very specific system. The structures doesn't necessarily support initiatives like the Trampoline House. So how did you actually come about creating it? What was the main challenge? Because you had to seek funding outside the traditional system, didn't you?
Yeah, we're not getting any funding from the arts system to Trampoline House. Camp is getting funding from the arts system. But there are two separate projects with separate economies and budgets. Well, the challenge of fundraising to a project like Trampoline House to begin with is to fundraise to people without political, juridical and civil rights. Asylum seekers in Denmark are deprived of all these basic rights. They don't have a social security number, they can't vote, they can't travel, they're not allowed to work, they can't choose where to live. Since the Danish state is paying for the administration of asylum seekers through the Red Cross and different municipalities who run the camps, then they've already paid for each individual asylum seeker once. So we've tried to, we have had to become very ingenious in finding ways to fundraise for specific activities and programs. And because it is proven again and again that people grow ill in the camp system from the pacification and the waiting and the inactivity, we have a strong argument that Trampoline House is this space where you remove yourself from camp life and you get better. The irony of the asylum system is that by the time you receive asylum, if you are that lucky, you have been kept waiting for so long in a labyrinth or a maze of bureaucracy. So by the time you are then to be integrated in one of the municipalities and you are expected to learn the language and quickly educate yourself and become a labor force, then you are so fed up with the system, perhaps even angry, so that the system is counterproductive. You have a system in Denmark where people have a roof over their head, they have food, they have a little pocket money, a small allowance every 2 weeks. But the waiting time, the uncertainty is what is killing.
It's actually a very, very strong image, this metaphor of wearing the life vest, because they're still kept floating, and they're kept floating for 1.5 years in waiting. I think I would let the audience come on. We have a question here, the lady in the blue.
Thank you. Is it on?
Please introduce yourself and then the question.
My name is Solveig Ovesen. I'm working also with images in Holbæk and Roskilde and Copenhagen next year with the CKU.
Can you hear Solveig?
I'm a curator. My name is Solveig Ovesen. Thank you, Tone, very much for your presentation. I'm a curator as well. So I have questions relating to the art and the camp. I really had literally goosebumps seeing the videos, and I say big congratulations for opening this. And I think it's a nice paraphrasing to say a game changer, like an institution that actually turn our view upon a subject, and also discursively. So talking about artists and artists from other countries that do work that deals with effects of migration, which is, I think it's sometimes a difficult word for some artists to use, because that is already a labeling of a certain kind of art and a certain kind of life, and that's what you want to remove the people from. So my question is, do you see a necessity to try to take that filter away sometimes as well when you look at an artwork? Do you also have an experience that artists who are in the diaspora from what you would call countries with generating migrants, how does these two concepts influence the way we look at the art? Like that it's a migrant who made the artwork, and that the artwork is about migration. I mean, could we also call it something else, like criticism of the nation-state concepts? And I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we could do that. This is also a question that is raised quite often. I think Frederica's and my underlining of wanting to prioritize artists with refugee or migrant experience is to make sure that camps become a platform for self-representation, and it becomes a platform for migrant communities in Copenhagen to go and identify and say, this is what I went through, this is where I was before arriving here, and entering the integration program, or being second or third or fourth generation immigrant. I think the migrant or refugee label is not problematic in Trampoline House and in camp. We are deliberately a platform trying to embrace this experience as perhaps the most acute and best description of contemporary culture and globalized problematics.
But does that indicate then that what happens in camp, what happens in the Trampoline House, to some extent affects what's actually happening outside the Trampoline House, in collegial galleries, in institutions outside of the Trampoline House? Do you have that kind of connection? Can you see that there is a transition of experience and curatorial practices to other? Not yet.
Camp is only 1 month old.
Yeah, I know camp, but let's take the Trampoline House then,
yes.
and the many exhibitions you've done in the last 5 years.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen projects like Trampoline House elsewhere. I think this idea of running a permanent space is something that fits ill with the art world. I think the art world is project-based, temporary projects moving on from one side to the other. The Trampoline House is in a physical location with a big house. It's part of the strategy to have a roof over our own head, to give users of the house a sense of ownership and self-empowerment and agency. And the moving of Trampoline House from side to side would not be able to generate those.
So to some extent that could, I'm just being the devil's advocate here, that could kind of be, you know, the little leaf hiding our nakedness that we then say, we, meaning the authorities, then say, okay, Trampoline House, now you can actually get some money from the cultural funding, a little bag of money to you, and then you are there, and you are taking care of our bad conscience with these artists on a permanent basis, and we don't have to include them into the infrastructure and the design of the art scene as such. Isn't that a risk?
It's a risk. On the other hand, I think that there's a general trend right now of project spaces opening up everywhere that are focusing on specific thematics and functioning as laboratories and research platforms. And I think it's more constructive to look at it as that.
And those are actually very artist-driven. They're not driven by the pipeline structures, aren't they?
No. Yeah.
Any more questions that you would like to raise for Tone? Yeah, please.
Hey, you.
It's on, I think. You'll get a new microphone here.
My name is Gillian Gronsan. I'm not a refugee, but as you see, I'm not totally real Dane. The question is this. Most migrants don't want to be an art project. So when you, and I know in this context we're talking about art and doing things, but I'm thinking then the uses of the house. I haven't been there, scusa, but I'm sort of thinking, is there a need for them to be part, to be art, or to be moved around to some other place, or is there a real strict division between, you know, your political aspirations and your, art cultural aspirations?
With the risk of generalizing when I'm speaking on behalf of the diversified group of users in the house, I would say that most people in Trampoline House don't identify the Trampoline House as an art project, and they don't consider themselves as part of an art project. And I'm not busy labeling Trampoline House as an art project either. I think it is important in a context like this to present the project and say this is what art can do, or artistic strategies and methodologies can do. But to present the project as a living art object is not something that we work with on an everyday basis in the house. But to have an exhibition space presenting aesthetic examinations of migrant and refugee experiences have proved tremendously important. I think Trampoline House in general is a very discursive place. We use words, and a lot of us in the house are using English, which is maybe our second, third, or fourth language, and it's a difficult conversation, and there's a number of situations of people getting lost in translation. We've developed what we call a Trampoline House English or Camp English, which is a sort of a hybrid English. We're trying to communicate as precisely as possible with all of us. But what happened with the camp opening, especially the fashion show, was that there was all of a sudden a very physical, performative, bodily method of communicating that all of us understood, that went straight through our bodies, and there was this like non-verbal communal body of all of us trying to identify with what we had, thank God, not have to go through, or what we had been going through ourselves. And I think art in the context of Trampoline House via the camp project provides a non-verbal means of communication that cuts across a lot of boundaries of privilege and underprivilege. Does that make sense?
Because it's not just about it's about knowing. If you come there because you want to be you want to have this encounter with other Danish people, or sort of perk up your life, or get some goods in it, but through the back door we also become an art project, you should know. Or you should say, oh, I like to be part of this, but I don't want to be part of this.
The Trampoline House is a platform where people move in and out. We have some people have been in the house for all 5 years. Some are there for 3 months. Then they get moved to another camp in the country. They get deported or they get asylum. We have international students who are here for a semester at the University of Copenhagen. They're with us in the house, and then they leave. all users of Trampoline House get introduced to the house as developed and conceived during a series of art workshops in the camps. The importance of that history, I think, is not so much that we are an art project now, but that it was art ideas that helped conceive this space in dialogue with the expert testimonies and recommendations of center residents, of people living in the system. I think it's this dialogical structure that is much more important to focus on in Trampoline House than this discussion of whether it's art or not art. I think art has helped us facilitate a form of social organization that empowers people and helps them to endure camp life. And I think that's the most important message to bring out there, along with telling people, of course, how the house was developed.
In fact, actually, some of these experiences and the idea of this dialogical structure is kind of the first embryo, as I see it. It's kind of the first embryo we've seen in the country, but it's now followed by not exactly copied or copy-paste projects, but similar kind of thinking. For instance, the KBH Plus, the Copenhagen Plus initiative, which is a performative arts initiative, with social housing in a warehouse actually very close to the shooter, where he was raised and grew up. In that area, working with cooking, working with local communities, working in a different setting, not refugee approach, but the same. It's not about art or not art. It's about the art and something else, doing something that actually affects society. That kind of approach. Unfortunately, we can't reach any more questions. We are out of time. I'm sorry. I know that there were, at least I saw 3 fingers. So Tone will be here, and you will have an opportunity to approach Tone afterwards.